Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, what the hell is it? It's 9 o'clock. I know that. It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday, December 8th, 2020. Time for another show. A Tuesday show, which means we hope against hope that all things remain quiet enough on the, Western Coast front and the Mountain Time Zone front that Joan McCarter can join us at some point during the 10 o'clock hour. Wow, it's been something, it's been an interesting morning. I didn't intend to spend any time on this, but I happened to catch this morning, and Bill sees it already. We already sees the collision coming in his morning tweet. He just says, the Kagro in the Morning Show live now. That part is absolutely true. And now the speculative part. Did Kagro X, me, David Waldman, did he really see Lou Dobbs and Stephen Miller mud wrestling with his own eyes and live to tell about it? Oh, well, I guess I did. Via Twitter, of course. I was not a paying customer at the event to watch it live, but I guess, I don't know, for whatever reason, Stephen Miller on Lou Dobbs' show last night, which is on what? Fox Business Channel? Is that different, I think? Anyway, I don't know. I'll take a look at the video here and see if the Chiron tells us. I would consider playing the audio for you if I didn't think it would damage your hearing in any way. And also, I don't know whether it's really worth giving time to the two of them speaking. I mean, they don't say anything worth listening to for its intrinsic value. It's a interpretational exercise. A very interesting fight, really, between the two of them, though they were trying desperately not to make it into one, I think. But a couple of takeaways. I mean, all right. What basically happens here is he hosts, Lou Dobbs hosts Stephen Miller on his show in order to give him a forum to rant and rave about what they call the massive amounts of blah, blah, blah fraud that's robbing our president who should be on Mount Rushmore of his second term and blah, 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 illegal this and yada, yada, that. What Miller is there to do, of course, is to sell the line that Donald Trump is pushing, which is, well, it's very difficult to tell, whether anybody really believes in it or not when they're pushing it. But generally speaking, it's the line that has facilitated his continued grift. Whatever riles up the base and whatever causes them to continue to donate money that they can then steal is what Miller is there to push. Dobbs, it appears, is kind of a true believer in the idea that there's been this fraud and that the election was stolen. And he can't keep himself from pushing on all fronts as a maximalist. And Miller is not quite prepared to go there, I guess. Miller will lie about anything and say anything, but he's got an objective to say the things that need to be said. And yell about, insinuate, in other words, that illegal immigrants of some sort, how this is his fetish, he'll say illegal immigrants, and we say, people who, are undocumented migrants who have come here to actually do work that none of the rest of us will do, et cetera, et cetera. We know that story already, but Miller likes to make it about illegal aliens. And how millions and millions of them crossed over and voted illegally. For what reason, I really don't know. Not sure why they would risk anything, risk arrest. They're doing everything they can to avoid notice and avoid arrest. And the idea of walking into a polling place to commit the alleged fraud that Trump's troops, I guess, and Trump's troops are in the news today too via Twitter, are on the lookout for. It would be the least likely thing any of them would do. But although honestly, they really ought to be able to. It's always kind of been my feeling. If you're here and living here and looking to become a permanent part of the landscape here, yeah, I don't know. Why shouldn't you be able to be represented in Congress and in the presidency? But that's a discussion for a different day. Anyway, he wants to say all these illegal ballots were cast, et cetera, but he doesn't have anything in particular he wants done about it, except that people should give money to the president and to the people who are able to grift from out of the campaign funds to which people would contribute or whatever. But Dobbs is a true believer, and Dobbs turns it into a rant about spineless Republicans and why won't they stand up for the president and do anything they can do to further the cause if they truly believe that the president was robbed here and that he ought to get a second term. And he calls out in particular, he says, Ted Cruz has offered to stand up for the president and to argue his case before the Supreme Court. Never mind, by the way, that there's nothing pending before the Supreme Court that requires or even permits oral argument at this point. But anyway, Ted Cruz, maybe even knowing that, jumps up and offers himself, I'm a brilliant constitutional attorney. Let me argue your case for you before the Supreme Court. And the White House has been reluctant to accept the offer. One, perhaps because someone somewhere who's advising the president said, well, there's no oral argument, so you'd look like an idiot if you said, yes, we want Ted Cruz to do it, because Ted Cruz won't be able to do it because there won't be any argument and you're going to look foolish. But on top of that, I think the real issue is Miller on the TV program realizes here immediately, I think, that he's being asked to offer up unauthorized and on his own a freelance White House endorsement of good old Lion Ted Cruz. And he realizes pretty quickly, this is the sort of thing you could get fired for pretty easily. Not that there's any time left in the Trump administration, but I'd like to see if I can hang on and grift some more post-administration, I guess. And I don't want to be persona non grata at this point in the game when there's no time to rehabilitate yourself and get back in the good graces of Trump and be able to grift later off of that. But he's that's basically what it is he realizes I am not authorized to endorse accepting the offer from Ted Cruz. I can make non-committal statements like, well, we absolutely salute the courage of Senator Cruz and thank him for his support, yada, yada. Then he goes back onto the illegal things. But it's interesting because Dobbs won't let him dodge this and keeps bringing it back to this and saying, but where are the Republicans? Where the hell are the Republicans? Why won't they do something? Why won't you jump at the chance? Why aren't you snapping up the offer from Ted Cruz to represent the president in court? By the way, I think we'd like to see, do you think you could push Dobbs to start saying, well, if for whatever reason he won't allow Ted Cruz to do it, why won't the president himself argue his case? He's a brilliant orator. We should be pushing for that. The president should present his case before the Supreme Court. I mean, except for the fact that it won't happen and it'll be anticlimactic. But then I guess we could say, why did the president chicken out of arguing before the Supreme Court? I don't know. It's possible win-win here. Have to think about it. Anyway, it's just an interesting schism that's happening here live on television between the grifters and the true believers. And it's kind of interesting. All right, well, we'll move off of that. And I did mention to you that there was something going on with Trump and his troops. I just found it funny, as everybody else appears to have found it funny this morning. Trump has tweeted, I don't know what else he's doing. I guess we should click over and see what other things he might be ranting about. But let's see. What people are looking at the moment is an 8:30 a.m. tweet yelling at Republicans. He's picking a fight over the National Defense Authorization Act and insisting that he will veto it. And it's news is that leaders on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the Congress, that is to say, in both houses of Congress, say they are, I guess they're pretty sure they could have the numbers to override a presidential veto on this thing, which, it wouldn't surprise me terribly. So, of course, Trump is going to come out and double down on the vetoing. And he tweets this morning, I hope House Republicans will vote against the very weak National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA for short, which I will veto, and he puts that in caps, must include a termination of Section 230, which really has nothing to do with this, but he puts in there parenthetically, for national security purposes. Preserve our national monuments, which also isn't doesn't belong in NDAA, and allow for 5G, and troop reductions in foreign lands. There's the troops. I don't know what 5G is doing in there, and I think he means allow for like more 5G and then troop reductions, but not allow for 5G reductions and troop reductions. I can't tell from the structure of his sentence, but it is Twitter. We'll give him a little bit of leeway there. On the other hand, he says troop reductions, TROUPE, troop reductions. Like, okay, troop, like circus troop reductions. I mean, that's what's going on here. I didn't even know he knew that spelling. And I don't know if it's an autocorrect thing. Would autocorrect go to troop, TROUPE? I don't think so. But maybe, I don't know. I guess he got fat fingers and short ones at that. But you're typing out TROOP, troop, and you accidentally, the O key and the U key aren't that far apart. There's just the I in between them. And I suppose if you hit TROIPE, it might go to, offer you troop or trope, possibly. I don't know. But anyway, so there you have it. Troop reductions. Look out. Cirque du Soleil, I guess. I didn't realize that they were in such trouble. Though it's caught everybody's eye today, and they find it funny and fascinating, and I can't blame them for that. What else is he tweeting about? Just out of curiosity, see if I'm missing out on anything fun and interesting today. I guess we're going to have to open it up in the browser view here. Let's see. I guess that was his latest thing. So it's been a quiet half an hour since then. And prior to that, it was from last night's tweeting around of OAN clips. So nothing fun and exciting there happening on that front this morning. But, all right, whatever. A little Frenchification of the presidential rhetoric this morning. Okay. Well, let's see. Many things that we can bring to your attention for your edification this morning. A lot of TION suffix work going on in the background here. Where do we want to start on today? Let's see. I guess we'll start with another of the short tidbits of interesting things about our dopey president. I don't know what was going on here. I don't have any larger context video, but the claim here in the tweet, let's see, whose tweet did I pick up here? I don't think I know the person, but, Kevin Frauder, maybe Frauder. I mean, that's not a terrible last name to have this day and age, but Frauder, but, he goes right at it. He knows what he's dealing with here. An actor and writer, so he's not going to, shy away from this. So he tweets, says, Frauder, like father, I guess. So Kevin Frauder, he tweets as Kevinly Father. Get it? Okay, our Kevinly Frauder father, who art on Twitter, says this. Well, anyway, he picks up on this video from C-SPAN yesterday of Donald Trump awarding a Presidential Medal of Freedom to Dan Gable. Now, I didn't know who Dan Gable was. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. He's a wrestler and wrestling coach, but, not a professional wrestler like Macho Man Randy Savage or anything like that. A real wrestler, like Olympic style wrestler and a longtime coach, and apparently a legend in the wrestling world. I assume this is a warm up for giving the Presidential Medal of Freedom to what's his name? Jim Jordan. Almost went to Jeffries there. No, not him. Okay. Dialing back about 20, 30 years on that. But okay. But I don't know whether he wants to just give medals to wrestlers left and right, whether there's something special. He's apparently quite accomplished. I don't know that I would have put it on the radar for Presidential Medal of Freedom, but fine. It might be just perfect. Anyway, not a great idea, in the age of the pandemic, of course, to hold an event like this where they held it, but it's too cold to do things outside in the Rose Garden now. Dan Gable, as I understand it, in his early 70s. Anyway, they held the ceremony in the Oval Office. They probably could have picked a bigger space. But anyway, in comes the family, the extended family, lots of them here. I guess, 25, 30 people. With the press, I guess you're talking about 50 people crammed into the Oval Office, almost entirely maskless, of course. And that's problematic all by itself. But the video clip, he has, Trump basically puts the medal on him, on Gable. I mean, I guess Trump makes some remarks first. Gable speaks a little while too, but it's not in this video clip. But he hangs the ribbon with the medal around Gable's neck and then steps away, says, a word or two to somebody, ignores the press's questions, gives one of those, finger gun thank yous to somebody and to Gable and to the press, and then takes off. Thank you, and walks out. Like post award of the medal, nothing. There's not a handshake, not a you deserve it, you're fantastic, you're a legend, thank you for coming here today, everybody. No further questions, we're not taking any questions, I'm leaving. Nothing like that. Just thank you, and wanders out. Like, I don't know, makes a beeline for the bathroom or something. But they literally, the camera pans back to Dan Gable, and he's doing the arms out shrug. Like, I don't know he's gone. What do I do? He just walked out on my Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony, and that's that. So I don't know. I guess we leave now. Totally together and with it mentally. We're doing great here. All right. Well, anyway, not a super important moment, but just in case you thought he was, somehow on the mend. I don't know where you would have picked up that idea, but it's completely wrong. All right. Let's switch over to the question of presidential pardons, because I got a piece or two here that I thought I would share, and it's occupying a lot of time in people's minds these days. Axios, I guess, reported something yesterday that made people frightened and panicky, again, about what might be on the president's mind and how much of it he might vomit out onto the record before anyone can stop him. Axios reports in their scoop, we don't know how scoopy it is, but Trump plans mass pardons even to people not asking, which is kind of interesting. And again, indicative of the way he handles his pardons. I think he surprises the pardon attorneys. There really are White House pardon attorneys and staff whose job is nothing but reviewing legitimate applications for pardons and clemency to see if there are any things that the president, for policy reasons, ought to elevate, especially on his way out the door. For things like this would be the busiest time of life, really, for a pardon attorney at this point at the end of an administration. But he's not involving them for the most part. President Trump isn't just accepting pardon requests, but blindly discussing them, quote, like Christmas gifts to people who haven't even asked. Sources with direct knowledge of the conversations told Axios. I guess now he's got in his head the idea of the preemptive pardon, one in which I'm sure he plans to issue to himself, but he's certainly planning them for his children and top advisors as well. And I guess he's starting to think about widening the circle, not because he's a generous guy, but because he wants to eliminate the worry of witnesses against him in future proceedings, I think. So let's see. A little gulp of maybe still warm tea here to keep things going. He says, there, you know how Axios sets this whole thing up. They have their little categories that they attach to their blurbs so that there seems like there's more words in their report. So what's going on behind the scenes? Trump recently told one advisor he was going to pardon, quote, every person who ever talked to me, unquote, suggesting, I think rather strongly, an even larger pardon blitz to come. As with most Trump conversations, the advisor wasn't sure how seriously to take the president, although Trump gave no indication he was joking. The big picture, as Axios puts it, the president relishes his unilateral authority. This is probably one of the most exciting things he's discovered, is unilateral authority for something. Relishes his unilateral authority to issue get-out-of-jail-free cards. Lately, though, he's been soliciting recipients, asking friends and advisors who they think he should pardon. Because he hasn't got any ideas, of course. Trump has also interrupted conversations to spontaneously suggest that he add the person he's speaking with to his pardon list, these sources said. Now, that's kind of interesting all by itself, and a couple of bullet points afterwards explain why. One, the offers haven't always been welcome. Why not? Next bullet point says one source felt awkward because the president was clearly trying to be helpful, but the advisor didn't believe they had committed any crimes. So what it is, of course, the president saying, you're guilty of sin, and maybe I'll pardon you too. Well, me? What did I do? Doesn't matter. Maybe you did nothing. Who cares? We don't want the Democrats to be able to come up with anything. So I'll pardon you. Just blanket pardon. Maybe, he might even, honestly, with Trump, you never know. He might really be thinking, who wouldn't want a preemptive pardon? I'll make it so broad because I'm not going to write 10 of these things or 20 of these. I mean, we could have staffers do it, but I just want to sign like one thing. Or, I guess I could sign a pile of them, but couldn't you just put all the names on one and say, I pardon you for everything you ever did or might do? And you might start thinking preemptive pardons. I could give people free passes. Murder anybody you want. This is a preemptive pardon for it. He might believe that he has the power to do that. Anyway, but more to the point, it's interesting, I guess, at the conclusion of your work for Trump in the White House to be told, by the way, I, as president, think you're guilty of an enormous number of crimes, but don't worry about it. I mean, I'll pardon you for all of them. But generally speaking, you should be aware that this president believes that anyone who spent any amount of time in his service is guilty of a crime, and he doesn't want to allow for any federal prosecution of it. And that's kind of telling. The third bullet point about why these conversations can be so awkward. The advisor, who also believed being on the list could hurt their public persona. And everyone would say, what did they do that needed to be pardoned, right? And then the White House declined to comment on any of this. Trump argues the preemptive pardons may be necessary because the Biden administration will target his former aides, the sources say. President-elect Biden has said he doesn't want to pursue the Trump team, and he has vowed an apolitical Justice Department. We all know about that tightrope he has to walk. And then, of course, some backstory. Axios first reported Trump's decision to pardon Michael Flynn, which set a template for a wave of pardons to friends and loyalists. One senior administration official said the practice has since expanded, with pardons being discussed like Christmas gifts. And then, let's see, a last bit here. It says, yes, but the White House pardon system doesn't entirely consist of the president's freewheeling offers. White House attorneys are working through a more traditional process, even if it doesn't cover every person Trump has discussed, a source familiar with the process said. So Axios breaking the news that there still are White House pardon attorneys. They're just not really actually involved in what the president's thinking is about pardons. So anyway, keep on the lookout for more of that. And I guess we'll start on this story before we head into the break related to the pardons, just something I saw yesterday while we were flipping through Greg's stories, one of which was in USA Today, and that led me to this opinion piece in USA Today from Terry Canfield. Trump's presidential pardons are an abuse of power, but we have ways to fight them. And I thought I would at least make note of what those ways might be. Terry Canfield is an author and graduate of the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. For 12 years, according to the little bio at the bottom of the piece here, she maintained an appellate law practice in California. And you can follow her on Twitter. I don't know if I do or not. Terry _ T-E-R-I, Terry. Canfield is K-A-N-E-F-I-E-L-D. We'll read a little bit of this piece, see if that's somebody you want to follow along with. Again, Trump's presidential powers are an abuse of power. Pardon me. Presidential pardons are an abuse of power, but we have ways to fight them. I am confident, she says, that a court would conclude the pardon power does not include the ability to reward those who commit crimes on the president's behalf. It's a theoretical argument. We're not sure where it goes. There is no doubt that President Donald Trump's pardon of Michael Flynn was an abuse of power. It begins, the chronology makes clear that Flynn committed a crime for the personal benefit of the president, who later pardoned him for that very crime. Now, Trump, egged on by conservative supporters like Sean Hannity, reportedly is discussing pardons for himself, his family, Rudy Giuliani, and who knows who else. The question is, what can we do about it? The Flynn timeline is damning. Trump named Flynn as his national security advisor on November 18th, 2016, and on December 29th, President Barack Obama unveiled sanctions against Russia for election-related hacking. On the same day, after consulting with, quote, a senior official of the presidential transition team who was with other senior members of the transition team at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, Flynn called Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak and urged Russia not to react to the sanctions. Trump and his team issued 7 statements in January of 2017 denying any contact between them and Russia, including specific denials that Flynn discussed sanctions with Kislyak. On January 24th, 2017, Flynn lied to the FBI about that conversation. On November 30th, 2017, he pleaded guilty to lying about it. And in the months between the lie and the guilty plea, Trump's lawyers secretly floated the prospect of a pardon for Flynn way back then in 2017. That's effectively witness tampering and obstructing justice. You all know about those charges as well. Let's see, coming up on the break, let's squeeze in perhaps one more paragraph, perhaps over our outro music, under legal and constitutional remedies for something like this. Let's see. If a president is able to pardon people who commit crimes on his behalf, a clear example of self-dealing, one of my favorite topics, of course, there is only the subtlest difference if a president directs a person to commit a crime and then pardons that crime. The implications of this are chilling, and in fact, Trump's public lies and misleading claims in January of 2017, like for instance that he'd had no contacts or deals in the works with Russia, act as signals to those around him about what they're supposed to say. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's continue on with the reading of this piece on what may or may not be able to do about these pardons. But yeah, setting up the fact that the way Trump handles his, one, his henchmen, and two, the pardons for his henchmen, there's very little difference between just basically saying, listen, this is the crime I need done, go do it, don't worry about the consequences, I will pardon you afterwards, which most people would probably agree is unlikely to pass theoretical muster, even if our traditional thinking about presidential pardon power is that it's absolute. I guess these are certainly some of the exceptions that even the founders would have recognized, again, only in theory, because they didn't actually recommend what to do if such a pardon came up. They, make some suggestions about, that certainly would mean that, I guess a president would lose their pardon power if they were no longer president, and you would surely impeach a president who uses and abuses the pardon power so nakedly, but it may be, in many people's minds, too late to impeach Donald Trump, though we know in theory, again, that it is not, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so where were we? We were setting up the fact that there's really very little difference between just directing the crime to be committed and then saying you'll pardon it and what Trump has done here. As we left off, we said Trump's public lies and misleading claims in January in the Flynn case. For instance, that he had no contacts with Russia and had no deals in the works with Russia. Those all act as signals to those around him about what they're supposed to say. You too should say, I've never talked to anybody in Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. And if you do have something to do with Russia, but you say that and you get caught in the lie, I'll just pardon that lying. In 2019 testimony to Congress, Michael Cohen, Trump's former personal attorney, said this is exactly how Trump lets the people in his orbit know which lies he wants them to tell. So it's an MO for him. The Constitution offers two remedies for a president who uses his office for self-dealing. And so therefore it's important to note again that in the last paragraph, our writer sets up the situation in which the president solicits a crime and then offers to pardon that crime as self-dealing because it inures to his benefit and he abuses the power of the office, again, to his benefit to cover up the crime that was for his benefit. The Constitution offers two remedies for a president who uses his office for self-dealing. Congress can impeach and remove, which I guess they can't, or voters can oust that president from office, which they just did, but which he refuses to recognize the authority of. Beyond that, and it's not a lot if you really don't care about law, the pardon can be challenged in court as self-dealing, corrupt, and therefore illegal. Well, anything can be challenged in court. It's just a matter of whether or not the courts recognize your right to proceed with the challenge, or whether they're just outcome oriented and say, well, we don't want the president to be in trouble here, so we're just not going to recognize your case as a valid one, or fine, it's a valid case, but you lose on the merits. All right, well, the judge in the Flynn case, Emmett Sullivan, it says here, could be asked to reject the Flynn pardon and continue with whatever sentencing he had planned. If the judge were to reject the pardon on the grounds that it was corrupt and therefore invalid, he'd be way out there on a limb, but he could do it. Flynn and his lawyers could and would, no doubt, file an appeal asking the appellate court to decide whether a corrupt pardon is valid. I am confident, says our writer here, Terry, let me get the name right. Terry Canefield. I was like, it's not Cornfield. I don't want to get that wrong. But I am confident, she says, that a court would conclude that the pardon power does not include the ability to use the pardon to reward those who commit crimes on the president's behalf. That they may do. I'm not as confident that they would be clear that they agree. You know, there would be room for them to disagree, and therefore I think they'd take that opportunity. About whether or not the crime was in fact committed on the president's behalf. I mean, it seems obvious that it was, but I mean, without an admission by Flynn that it was, or another witness saying, I witnessed, the hatching of this plan, and the president very clearly said this would inure to his benefit and he wanted it done for his benefit. I don't know. They would say it sure looks like it, but that's not enough to overturn the pardon power here. So I don't know. Let's see. The next section here says another option. Oh, it's not the next section yet. I'm sorry. It's been interrupted by what I think is a link to another related USA Today article. So anyway, another option would be criminal prosecution. If further investigation confirms that the pardon was offered in exchange for Flynn's silence, which would be a crime by itself, charges could be filed against anyone involved in a pay-for-pardon scheme for Flynn or anyone else. Although it's not entirely clear that there was a pay part in this. Someone else has clearly, apparently, been offering to pay for pardons, but I don't know if Flynn did. The fact that Trump has a legal right to pardon people does not mean he can exercise his right in the commission of a crime. I have a legal right to walk into a bank, but that doesn't give me the right to rob the bank. Not the strongest metaphor I've ever seen, but now another section called Scrutinize Self-Serving Pardons. House Democrats have introduced a bill, which of course won't go anywhere in time to do anything about this, and would be ex post facto anyway, introduced a bill designed to make it harder for future presidents to self-deal. Our one goal is to prevent abuse of the pardon power by requiring the Justice Department and White House to provide materials to Congress concerning any self-serving presidential pardon or commutation in cases involving the president, his or her relatives, or associates. The bill clarifies that the president and vice president are public officials and pardons are official acts and things of value for purposes of the federal bribery statute. It also would prohibit self-pardon. In effect, this legislation codifies the principle that a president cannot use the power of his office corruptly. It reflects the likely ways a court would rule on the extent of the pardon power and makes explicit in law what we know about the limits of presidential power. I think I disagree, at least partially, on the question of how likely it is that a court would rule this particular way on the extent of the pardon power. I have a feeling that they would find a very different take on this. My guess, I guess before we continue and I lose the thought, again, and I think I expressed this before, the court would likely say, yeah, in theory, you don't want to have presidents using the pardon power to either to cover up crimes that inure to his benefit, to cover up crimes that he may have ordered, or to complete crimes of his own in the realm of obstruction of justice, etc., or bribery, or what have you. That seems true enough. I guess my concern is that they would say, on the other hand, as with any other crime, we would need to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt that this thing actually happened. And then it's complicated by the very strong tradition of the view that the president's pardon power is plenary and more or less absolute, even if we don't want to admit it's absolute. It's very strongly, very widely been viewed historically as absolute. And even though we'll open the door to some scrutiny of it, we do so with the knowledge that it's assumed going in that the president has got this power, and his use of it cannot be, I mean, it can't be suspect just the fact that he's used it. That kind of suspicion can't be entertained, given how, broadly we view this power. But then you're just landing right back at the same place, which is to say there needs to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt that this is what happened and this is what motivated it. All the elements of this crime have to be established beyond a reasonable doubt. And in most cases, there will be doubt about the motive unless the president is dumb enough to blurt out what the motive is. This president is dumb enough to blurt out what the motive is, and I think he may already have done so. But I'm not positive that it matches to this specific case. He certainly blurted out the motive with other people he's offered pardons to, but I don't know what's on the record with respect to Flynn. And that's the sort of technicality that I think that could pose a real problem for this. Again, in theory, it makes sense, and you shouldn't, don't skip over the opportunity if you've got it to make this challenge, but I don't know how much I would bet on the outcome. Anyway, Trump has long talked of pardoning himself and family members. He even insisted that he has the, quote, absolute right to pardon himself, which would simply take the middleman out of the transaction. Instead of pardoning people who commit crimes on his behalf, he could simply commit the crimes himself and then pardon himself. Brace yourself for what's likely coming next, a flurry of pardons for Trump's family members, associates, and even himself. Assuming that more corrupt pardons are on the way, legal challenges will follow. As for a self-pardon, I expect the challenges to assert that self-pardon violates a president's fiduciary duties. And as Fordham law professors Jed Sugarman and Ethan Laib argue, that it violates the Constitution's presidential oath to, quote, faithfully execute the office. That is a possibility, too. If or when Trump tries to pardon himself, he'll certainly have to defend it in court, and he will lose. That is the prediction of Terry Canfield here. I have my doubts, but it should absolutely be the case that these things do get challenged. I just don't know how well they actually end up surviving. I mean, we do have these reports. I guess this is the real problem, right? It's translating. This is difficult, particularly for partisans like us, who and people who are relatively intelligent, who make the logical leaps when necessary. I think we've pieced the puzzle together correctly. We understand the story of what's happening here, and we have a pretty much a correct version of it. The question is can a fireproof, bulletproof case of it be presented from beginning to end, establishing and meeting all the elements of the crime over and above objections about policy prerogatives and plenary powers of the presidency? We say things like, okay, well, he obviously he ordered this person to do this thing. They couldn't be expected to act on their own without prior authorization in something this delicate. All right. I mean, that's a good logical conclusion. Now, can you prove that it actually went that way? That's a big problem, usually. What's on the record that shows or is likely to, or indicates, tends to show anyway, that the president either requested this or authorized it or insisted on it. And does our version of what he's done here stand up to what his explanation of what he's done here is? I guess here we can switch over to the subject of his many telephone calls, for instance, his newest crimes, his calls to the leaders of Republican-led legislatures in Georgia, Michigan, and now Pennsylvania, asking them directly for intervention in the certification of their votes and appointment of their electors. And people have rightly pointed out, these phone calls themselves really ought to be regarded as crimes. They are election interference and state crimes at that, by the way. In addition, I think there's probably also a federal element to it, but if he can pardon himself from the federal element, it may still be the case that Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Michigan have state law cases against him. But starting from the way that Trump likely views it, because he'll have his chance to present his own case in court somewhere along the line. I'm sure that Trump, for instance, views the conversation that he had with the Speaker of the House, the state house in Pennsylvania, was in the news yesterday. And I am pretty sure that he probably views that, probably exactly as he viewed the call with President Zelensky of Ukraine as a perfect call, that he did the things that he thinks from watching, I guess, mob movies that the boss has to do to not, you can't pin this on me. I said the magic words or avoided the magic words in my telephone conversation. Here, we'll switch gears to this story just to bring you up to speed on this fact. Amy Gardner, Josh Dawsey, Rachel Bade on the Washington Post story. Trump asks Pennsylvania House Speaker for help overturning election results, personally intervening in a third state. Before we even read the article, I'll complete the thought here and say what I think Trump would tell you is that no, there's no crime here. What's the crime? He would say. And this is his businessman's, layman's understanding of the law. It may very well be the case that, yeah, he has actually met the elements of this or that crime with this phone call. But from, what he'll tell prosecutors and other authorities is, no, there was no crime here. I called the guy, the guy. He's the Speaker of the House of the Pennsylvania State Legislature. I called him and I said, listen, and because in this article, there's a, reconstruction of the words that the president used according to, let's see, as a matter of fact, the source for this is the spokesperson for the Pennsylvania State House's Speaker. The Speaker is Cutler. I don't know who. It's not Jay Cutler. He's not in the league anymore. Brian Cutler with a Y. House Speaker Brian Cutler's office. And his spokesperson is Michael Straub. And he says that the conversation went something like this. The president said, I'm hearing about all these issues in Philadelphia and these issues with your law, said Cutler spokesman Michael Straub, imitating Donald Trump, and describing the House Speaker's two conversations with Trump. And then, what can we do to fix it? I'm sure in Trump's mind, I very carefully said, don't do anything. I don't want you doing anything illegal. I got a question. I've been hearing all this stuff about the way the vote went in Philly. and the way they were very illegally, very unconstitutionally, very strongly preventing our Republican observers from observing the count. Not true. But I keep hearing it. Many people are saying, you know how he does this. And I want you to look into it. What can we do to fix it? Right? And what he'll say is, I guess a lawyer could question him. So what did you think that the Speaker of the House was going to say to you? You said, what can we do to fix it? What did you hope he would do to fix it? I don't know. I don't know what he was. I thought he would tell me all the legal options that we had for fixing it. And, I just asked him, what can we do to fix it? If the answer is, sir, I'm very sorry, tears streaming down his eyes. I'm very sorry, sir. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do legally. I would have said, okay, you tried your best. You've racked your brains. You've searched the law books. There's just nothing. That's all there is to it. I'm just going to have to accept my fate. Of course, in the conversation, what the hell do you mean there's nothing? You get back to turn those machines back on. Give me something, right? Don't come back. Don't tell me you can't. And don't talk to me again until you have a solution. That may have been the actual conversation. But Trump will say, there was nothing illegal. I wanted to know what I could do about this thing. There's very troubling, these allegations out of Philadelphia, and I just wanted to see if we could fix them because they're wrong and they need to be fixed. The fact that he's incompetent to fix them, this guy in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, that's not my fault. I'm just asking. And the question is, can you get a jury to see it? Can you get one juror to see it that way in a criminal case? And, if the answer is yes, then, yeah, I think maybe he gets away with it and the pardon stands. Well, everybody thinks that, so we're not talking about a pardon in this case, but the analogy can be made very easily. Everybody thinks Michael Flynn had this deal worked out in his head or had this deal described to him by the President of the United States and he executed it. But Michael Flynn in court will swear that he came up with it on his own, or that there was no plan, or that he too had a perfect conversation with the Russian ambassador. I didn't say ignore the sanctions. I said, I'm hearing these problems about sanctions and about Russia. What can we do to fix it? And he on his own came up with the idea that they would ignore the sanction. I said, okay, that's your prerogative. I'll tell the president you're going to do what you're going to do. And we'll see what happens. And that could be his description of it. And if it's enough for one juror, then I think, you might skate on these things. This is the great disappointment of the way law sometimes actually works. Anyway, I think that it could very easily fall that way. Well, let's get the rest. I mean, is there more really to the story? You heard the heart of the story of the Pennsylvania thing. I guess the details that we can fit in before the next top of the hour break might be somewhat informative. Right. So Trump called the Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives twice during the last week to make an extraordinary request for help in reversing his loss in the state, reflecting a broadening pressure campaign by the president and his allies to try to subvert the 2020 election result. Good use of the word, subvert. The calls, confirmed by House Speaker Brian Cutler's office, make Pennsylvania the third state where Trump has directly attempted to overturn a result since he lost the election to Biden. He previously reached out to Republicans in Michigan, and on Saturday he pressured Brian Kemp of Georgia, governor of Georgia, to try to call in a call to try to replace that state's electors. The president's outreach to the Pennsylvania's Republican House leader came after his campaign and its allies decisively lost, numerous legal challenges. I guess there's one thing sort of kind of still alive. That's the thing that Lou Dobbs wants Ted Cruz to argue, which isn't really available for argument on. This is a suit brought by one of the Republican congressmen from Pennsylvania, plus somebody else who ran and lost. But now, I guess, suit being joined and amicus brief being filed by several sitting members of Congress as well, as I understand it. The usual suspects, of course. But yeah, looking for, I guess, some sort of restraining order against Pennsylvania, or an order to decertify Pennsylvania. I don't even know what they're asking for at this point. because it hardly makes any difference. But let me stick with this story, right? So then there's the description from Michael Straub about the conversation, which Trump likely regards as perfect, just as he did with the Ukraine thing. I didn't ask him to do anything. I said, I'd like you to do us a favor. What's the big deal? Us, America, not me, right? That'll be his plea. White House spokesman declined to comment on the calls. Cutler told the president that the legislature had no power to overturn the state's chosen slate of electors, according to Straub, who was not himself on the call, by the way, but was briefed about it afterwards. But late last week, the House Speaker was among 60 Republican state lawmakers who sent a letter to Pennsylvania's congressional representatives urging them to object to the state's electoral slate on January 6th, which is what we've been talking about for a long time here, when Congress is formally set to accept the results, to count anyway, and then accept the results. By the way, also saw via Twitter over the weekend that this letter that was circulated from Republican state legislators urging Pennsylvania's congressional representatives to object to Pennsylvania's electoral votes on January 6th, apparently went out, and then I don't know how many, but I guess several members of the Pennsylvania legislature then later objected and said, hey, I didn't say I wanted to sign on to that letter. I didn't intend to sign on to that letter. You just put my name on there. Take it off, which is just kind of amazing. Talk about, lie about anything. They're sending out letters, fake letters. Here, election fraud. There's fake ballots being produced here. Says who? Says me, this state legislator. Wait a minute. I'm not state legislator. I didn't say that. That's a fake letter. Look the other way. Something else. Poof. Abracadabra. Magic. As my kids used to say. They couldn't think of the magic words. 1, 2, 3, magic. Well, okay. It's very utilitarian magic words for you there. Okay. So I don't know. I was kind of amazed by that. But I guess Cutler, in the middle of this, says there's no power here for us to do it. Push comes to shove, essentially. He won't sign his name on the thing that can get him in trouble. But in a letter, I'm asking you to do it, right? So this is a letter from Cutler. Let's you and him fight, right? So I want you to object to this thing, and you fight it out in Congress in Washington. I'll just root for you from here in Harrisburg. But why won't you do something about it in Harrisburg? You have tremendous amount of power in Harrisburg. Well, yes and no. The point is, I'm not going to use it. You should use yours. Which I guess brings us back to like Lou Dobbs. This is Lou Dobbs's basic objection is what is it with these guys, Speaker of the House in Harrisburg here says, you guys do it in Washington. Well, our claim in Washington would be a lot stronger if you in Harrisburg would convene a session and insist that the slate was improperly selected. Oh, well, we don't have the power to do that. And they may be right. I mean, it might not be within their power to call the legislature back into session. I don't think they're in session right now, but I'm mixing it up. There's a lot of states where this is happening, and one, or if not all of them, the legislatures aren't in session. They don't have a mechanism to call themselves back into session, having, adjourned by resolution at this point. There's no authority by which they can be called back into session except by the governor calling a special session, and the governor of Pennsylvania, a Democrat, won't agree to do it. But I mean, they could just get together and say, the tyrannical governor won't let us express ourselves here on this very important issue, and we're calling ourselves into extraordinary session, and you can challenge our authority to do so in court if you want, but in the meantime, here's our resolution. It would be very awkward and very difficult and desperate looking, but if you're desperate, as Lou Dobbs is, he says, go ahead, chance it, fight your way through court. Don't just sit there and say there's nothing you can do. In a way, Dobbs kind of has a point about that. It's very interesting to watch. All right, let's see what's left in this article here. Although the move is highly unlikely to gain traction, that is to say the objection by Pennsylvania's federal legislators to the counting of their electoral vote. At least one Pennsylvania Republican, Representative Scott Perry, said in an interview Monday night that he will heed the request and dispute the state's electors. The embrace of Trump's false claims by many Pennsylvania Republican lawmakers shows how the president's baseless attacks on the integrity of the election have gained ground with his supporters. Protesters chanting, "Stop the steal," some with firearms, demonstrated over the weekend at the homes of both Cutler in Pennsylvania and the Democratic Secretary of State in Michigan. You likely heard about that news. I had heard it, but I hadn't heard that they were also outside of Cutler's house. Interesting. Trump stoked those flames Saturday at a rally for the two Republican Senate candidates in Georgia, where he ranted for an hour and 40 minutes, almost exclusively about fraud. Very little about the reason he was supposedly there, the upcoming runoff election. Blah, blah, blah. He says a lot of BS down there. They quote some of it here, what he said in Georgia. And then he said that hopefully our legislatures in the United States Supreme Court will step forward and save our country. Trump's continued embrace of such rhetoric has prompted fresh alarm among Democrats and some Republicans who fear that the president is inciting violence. And while his efforts to overturn the result are widely viewed as fruitless, many officials said they are distressed at the lasting harm they believe he's doing to the public faith in U.S. elections. That's true. Many people are saying it. Absolutely true. And by the way, I guess it's looking worse and worse these days. They're aging worse and worse. These hot takes that came out in the immediate aftermath of some of these claims and efforts in the courts. The very savvy folks in the American punditry who said the real stupidity here is not that Trump is trying to overturn the election, but that other people are worried. How could you be worried? Everybody knows it's not going to work out. And, and then, of course, denigrating people who said, well, maybe our worrying about it publicly actually prevents some of it from happening. Oh, yeah, sure, I'm sure. You tweeted the solution. Yeah, right. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, I think it was Adam Serwer who had tweeted that over the weekend, and I don't have it. I don't think I have it handy. It might be in pocket somewhere. It was, it was just well encapsulating everything that's going on, and it made me think of the old Church of the Savvy thing, right? The idea being somehow it was, it seemed safe for the punditry to not only criticize the efforts that Trump was undertaking as fruitless, but that liberal activists who thought that Trump could even possibly succeed in these things were foolish for wasting their time on such things, and even more foolish for thinking that their awesome tweets calling it out were what was really preventing Trump from succeeding in all of this. But yeah, it was quite annoying, and I don't think I put aside the Serwer tweet, but note to myself to take a look for it. But interestingly enough, I guess we can follow that up with something from the very frequently, startlingly frequently correct Zeynep Tufekci. It doesn't matter what the subject is, apparently. I don't know. I guess she just thinks very clearly, but she actually addresses this subject in The Atlantic. And, it's always worth checking in with what she has to say about these things, whether it's the risk of COVID infection inside of a restaurant thanks to the air circulation inside, or this subject and what the president can and can't get away with. I don't know why exactly. We'll find out why the title is "This Must Be Your First." Okay? Acting as if Trump is trying to stage a coup is the best way to ensure he won't, she says, and I'll always take her on. I'd pick her for my team every time, so let's see what's up. On the evening of September 11th, 1980, how did this start? Okay, my mom was approached by a neighbor who held rank in the Turkish military. He told her to stock up on bread and rice. Oh, another coup, she immediately groaned. The neighbor was aghast. He wasn't supposed to tell anyone what was coming. But my mom, of course, had immediately understood what his advice must have meant. Turkey is the land of coups. Not couscous, but coups, C-O-U-P-S, right? This was neither the first nor the last coup it would face. Now I understand the title. I'm glad she got right to it. Over 3 decades later, I walked up to a counter in Antalya Airport to tell a disbelieving airline employee that our flight would shortly be canceled because the tanks being reported in the streets of Istanbul meant that a coup attempt was underway. And there's an asterisk here, so maybe we'll find out what that footnote is later on. I don't know. Can I quickly find it? Is it down at the bottom? And that gives me an indication of how long this article is. Oh, my goodness. It's much, much longer than I thought. What does it say here? By the way, the asterisk says a previous version of this article misstated the amount of time. I see. Between 1980 and 2016, it is over 3 decades. 3 decades, not 2. Okay. So that was kind of an unimportant thing, but it did give me an indication of how long this article is. I better hurry. Okay. So over 3 decades later, she walks up to the airport and says, our flight will be canceled probably because there's tanks in the street in Istanbul. It must be a military exercise, the counter attendant here shrugged. Some routine transport of troops, perhaps? If so, I asked her, where's the prime minister? Why isn't he on TV to tell us that? Another woman approached the counter. This must be your first, she said to the young woman behind the counter who was still shaking her head. It's my 4th. So you get the idea. Anyway, I guess the idea is she's experienced with the atmosphere in which a coup takes place and what it feels like to people who don't know what's going on. So I guess I told the airline employee that we were not getting on that plane destined for the Istanbul airport, which I knew would be a primary target. The other woman and I nodded at each other, becoming an immediate coup pod. I went out to secure transportation for us. This airport was not going to be safe either, while she and my 7-year-old son went to retrieve our luggage. His first too, I said to her. In political science, the term coup refers to the illegitimate overthrow of a sitting government, usually through violence or the threat of violence. The technical term for attempting to stay in power illegitimately after losing an election, for instance, is self-coup or auto-coup, sometimes autogolpe, I guess from the Spanish, as opposed to the French of coup. Anyway, much debate has ensued about what exactly to call whatever Trump is attempting right now and about how worried we should be. It's true the whole thing seems ludicrous. The incoherent lawsuits, the late-night champagne given to official election canvassers in Trump hotels, the tweets riddled with grammatical errors and weird capitalization. Trump has been broadly acknowledged as norm-shattering, and some have argued that this is just more of his usual bluster, while others have pointed out terminological issues with calling his endeavors a coup. Not particularly useful. Coup may not quite capture what we're witnessing in the United States right now, but there's also a danger here. Punditry can tend to focus too much on decorum and terminology. Yeah, that's true. Like the overachieving students so many of us once were, conflating the ridiculous with the unserious. The incoherence and incompetence of the attempts do not change its nature, however, nor did those traits allow us to dismiss it or ignore it until it finally fails on account of that incompetence. Part of the problem is that we haven't developed linguistic precision to put a name to it all, not just to what's been happening since November, but to the processes within which it's embedded. That's dangerous because language is a tool of survival. The Inuit have many words for snow, this story again, but their experience demands that kind of exactness. The claim has been disputed, by the way, but the latest research affirms it. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, learned something else in this. These people need to know whether ice is fit to walk on or whether you will sink through it. It's a matter of life or death, the linguist William DeRose told New Scientist. I guess he was part of the new research. In Turkish, we do have many different words for different types of coups. Aha, isn't that interesting? Because our experience similarly demands it. For example, coups that are attempted through threatening letters from the military are called memorandum coups. A 2007 attempt is commonly referred to as the E-coup because the threatening letter from the military was first posted on the internet. That is interesting. The one before that, in 1997, is often referred to as the postmodern or soft coup. We don't know why, but she does. We know the difference between military coups that start from the top and follow the military chain of command, and those that do not. The term autogolpe comes from the Spanish, partly because there have been so many such attempts in Latin America. The U.S. president is trying to steal the election, and crucially, his party either tacitly approves or is pretending not to see it. That brings me back to an earlier point that I wanted to make in discussing this thing about his calls to the Trump's calls to Cutler in Pennsylvania. I just thought it was interesting that Trump clearly makes these calls thinking, oh, everyone will get my subtle hints, for one thing. And another thing, they'll likely do this stuff. In Trump's mind, he can't understand why one Republican wouldn't commit a crime knowingly and willingly for another Republican. After all, we're both Republicans. In Trump's mind, that's why we're Republicans. We joined the Republican Party because of our mutual willingness to commit crimes for one another and to commit crimes against Democrats in order to maintain our power to commit those other crimes for each other's benefit. And I guess not all Republicans feel the same way. Although a lot of you pushed back on Twitter, he might be right about that part. So it is possible for him occasionally to be correct about such things. I just thought it was kind of interesting. And by the way, if you're the kind of Republican that doesn't believe in that sort of thing, this too should leave you sick to your stomach and convince you to leave the Republican Party. Because quite honestly, it looks like the majority of elected Republicans at the same time believe this like Trump does, but at the same time also are cowards in the Lou Dobbs sense, that they won't actually risk their own necks for it. They just expect you to commit crimes for them. And when it's your turn to commit a crime for other people, they'll turn tail and run. And I guess that's part of the incompetence of the whole scheme that Zeynep is talking about a little bit, and others have mentioned as part of their conversations. It's not so much that they're incompetent to it, but that they're afraid to actually hold up their end of the bargain. But they're angry when other people won't commit crimes for them. Anyway, moving on here. Let's see, right. The norm shattering gets mentioned. Maybe in other languages from places with more experience with this particular type of power grab, we'd be better able to discuss the subtleties of this effort, to distinguish the post-election intervention from the election day injustices, to separate the legal but frivolous from the outright lawless, and to understand why his party's reaction, or lack of reaction, is not just about wanting to conclude an embarrassing presidency with minimal fanfare, which reminds me of another story that we have yet to mention, which is apparently the rumor that Trump is looking to counter-program the inauguration. Oh, yes, Greg did mention that by, commandeering Marine One, Air Force One, and making a big exit and then having a rally down at Mar-a-Lago. By the way, Biden should ground those aircraft and not allow him to do that. But I'm sure he'll think, oh, I'll be the bigger person and allow this to go on. Anyway, right. So where were we? The lack of reaction, wanting to conclude. Oh, yes, concluding the embarrassing presidency with minimal fanfare. But in English, she continues, only one widely understood word captures what Donald Trump is trying to do, even though his acts do not meet its technical definition. Trump is attempting to stage some kind of coup, one that is embedded in a broader and ongoing power grab. And if that's hard to recognize, this might be your first. Okay. On Tuesday, Gabriel Sterling, the Republican who serves as Georgia's voting system implementation manager, appeared at a press conference. We remember it, voice shaking. He talked about how the home of Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, his boss, had been targeted after the president once again baselessly claimed that there was a massive voter fraud going on in Georgia and called Raffensperger an enemy of the people. Sterling called on the president and the state's two Republican senators to condemn the threats of violence against election workers. That scene itself was unsettling, but when, just a few hours later, Trump retweeted Sterling's plea with a shrug and a reassertion of his desire to steal the election, the situation turned profoundly frightening. Rigged election, the president wrote, shows signatures in envelopes, exposed the massive voter fraud in Georgia. What is Secretary of State and Brian Kemp, using his Twitter handle there, afraid of? They know what we'll find. With just a few notable exceptions, Republican officials have met Trump's lies with a combination of tacit approval, pretending not to notice them, or forbearance. In a recent survey, an alarming 222 Republicans in the House and Senate, 88%, refused to acknowledge that Joe Biden won the presidency. Another 2 insisted Trump won. Two. Okay? A few more have started speaking out, but what has finally taxed their patience seems to be anxiety that Trump's antics may cost them an upcoming election for 2 U.S. Senate seats in Georgia, an instrumental concern about continuing to exercise power, rather than a substantive worry about the attempted election theft itself. It should be noted that there have been conservative voices who have responded with the appropriate fury, but that few are elected officials or leaders of the GOP. After Sterling spoke in Georgia, a local TV station asked the 2 Republican senators running for election in the January runoff for comment, but instead of offering straightforward denunciations, both issued perfunctory condemnations and then used the opportunity to continue to fan doubts about the process. Senator Perdue condemns violence of any kind against anybody, period, his campaign said. We won't apologize for addressing the obvious issues with the way our state conducts its elections, though. The other senator's campaign took a similar line. Like many officials, as someone who's been the subject of threats, of course Senator Loeffler condemns violence of any kind. How ridiculous to even suggest otherwise. We also condemn inaction and lack of accountability in our election systems process, and won't apologize for calling it out, which is exactly what happened here and what you're being asked to do. What is it that Republican leadership is hoping will pass? That Republican leadership is hoping will pass without too much comment, solved by the ticking down of the transition clock. Let's run through it, and this is not even all of it. Every day adds more. The president has repeatedly and baselessly claimed that the election was stolen from him and continues to do so daily. He is effectively charging that election officers around the country are involved in a dangerous conspiracy and that the incoming president is the leader of this illegal attempt. The president and his key allies have repeatedly called for Republican state legislators to steal the election for him by appointing new electors who will support him instead of backing the winner of the state's electoral votes. The president, who has the power to appoint judges for lifetime appointments, and who has appointed nearly a third of federal judges on the crucial circuit court level in the United States, more than any other president in recent history at this point in their presidency, has asked the courts to throw out valid votes wholesale, especially in cities with minority voters. Right after the election, a legal advisor to the president stated on national television, quote, "We're waiting for the United States Supreme Court, of which the president has nominated 3 justices," this is still part of the quote, "to step in and do something, and hopefully Amy Coney Barrett will come through," unquote. The president's high-profile allies are holding rallies where supporters are chanting, "Lock him up," calling for the imprisonment of Georgia's Republican governor, who is opposing his attempts to steal the election. Georgia conducted 2 thorough recounts, and I guess a third eventually, of the votes and found that the margin by which Trump lost the election holds. The president personally called the 2 Republican canvassers in Wayne County, Michigan, and then both signed affidavits attempting to rescind their certification of the vote in that state. Well, that county anyway. They had earlier tried to block certification of votes from Detroit, providing a glimpse of what would happen if a more competent president tried to steal an election. The president has amplified messages that call for people to, quote, "fight back hard" against the allegedly stolen election. The president's election lawyer said that the entire election, frankly, in all the swing states should be overturned, and the legislatures should make sure that the electors are selected for Trump. She has since been dismissed from his team, but he has not publicly repudiated her statements, and she continues to make similar statements. Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, powerful post, who was just pardoned by Trump, has also amplified calls for the president to suspend the Constitution and hold another election, an exercise presumably to be repeated until he wins. The president summarily fired Christopher Krebs, director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the Department of Homeland Security, because he vouched that the election was not stolen. Joe DeGeneva, a lawyer for the Trump campaign, said that Krebs should be taken out at dawn and shot. DeGeneva later said that the statement had been made in jest. It's a very funny joke. Before the election, the president pressured the attorney general to investigate his opponent and his son after being impeached for pressuring a foreign state to announce its own investigation into his opponent's son. The president has also fired the chief of the Pentagon, along with other top officials. These dismissals remain unexplained, but Trump was reportedly infuriated at the defense secretary's opposition to using active duty military troops against protesters in U.S. cities, portending what he might have liked to do, even though his incompetence has meant that he hasn't found a way. What makes this moment deeply alarming and makes Republicans' overwhelming silence and tacit approval deeply dangerous, rather than merely an attempt to run out the clock on the president's clownish behavior, is that Trump's attempt to steal this election builds on a process that has already entrenched minority rule around the country. In North Carolina, where I live, Zeynep says, only 3 of the state's 13 representatives in the House were Democrats after the 2014 congressional election, despite Democrats getting 44% of the vote. In 2016, the Democratic Party's vote share of the state increased to 47%, but still, only 3 representatives were Democrats. In 2018, Democrats won an even larger share of the vote, 48.3%, but still had only 3 representatives in Congress. In 2019, North Carolina's blatantly gerrymandered district maps were finally struck down by the Supreme Court, and so, this year, the Democrats managed a meager increase in representation, 5 representatives out of 13, despite again receiving 48% of the vote. Who draws these grossly unfair maps, which are typical of others across the country? The state legislatures, which themselves are often elected using maps that reflect unrepresentative gerrymandering. In North Carolina in 2016, for example, the Republicans won a veto-proof supermajority in the state House of Representatives, obtaining more than 2/3 of the seats, despite winning just 52% of the vote. Statewide races cannot be similarly gerrymandered, though, and that year North Carolina voters elected a Democratic governor and attorney general. In response, the lame duck legislature rushed to take away key powers from those officers. They succeeded. The General Assembly then used its veto-proof majority to override 23 of Governor Roy Cooper's 28 vetoes in the first 3 years of his term, rendering one of his key remaining powers effectively useless. In Wisconsin in 2018, Republicans won a near veto-proof supermajority in the state legislature with a minority of votes in the state. That same year, Republican Governor Scott Walker lost his bid for re-election, a pretty clear indication of where people are statewide when you can't gerrymander things, right? The same as in North Carolina. And Republican candidates for lieutenant governor and attorney general were also defeated. Again, statewide offices resist gerrymandering. After the loss, the Wisconsin state legislature followed the same playbook as the GOP in North Carolina, rushing in a lame duck session to take away crucial powers previously exercised by Walker. The lawsuits filed by Democrats were rejected by the Republican-dominated state Supreme Court, which is also elected there in Wisconsin. When voters try to contest gerrymanders or power grabs, many of the cases end up before the U.S. Supreme Court, where lifetime appointments are made by the president but approved by the Senate. The Senate, though, is so lopsided right now that 26 states containing just 17% of the U.S. population elect a majority of the senators, the smallest that proportion has ever been. That's the people in the smallest 26 states. The Republican Party's Senate majority in recent years has rested on its strength in these rural states. Barack Obama couldn't even get a Senate hearing for his last nominee to the Supreme Court. Today, the United States has a House filled with gerrymandered districts, a Senate dramatically tilted toward rural states, some state legislatures controlled by electoral minorities or slim majorities who get to exercise power as if they were overwhelming, and a Supreme Court with 3 justices appointed by a president who lost the popular vote twice. It is, I added the twice there, is it any wonder that Trump thinks he can defy the results of an election and cling to power despite losing an election, or that his party does not stand up for the will of voters? In 1852, let's go back a little bit more. Karl Marx famously modified Hegel's observation that historical occurrences tend to repeat by adding that they may occur the first time as tragedy and the second time as farce. Marx was mocking Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, who had just seized power in a coup, or in the interest of technical precision, an autogolpe, declaring himself emperor. Louis Napoleon did indeed seem like a figure worth ridicule, but the well-heeled members of ruling classes often confuse lack of propriety for weakness. Let's see, Adolphe Thiers, a leading figure in the biggest political party that had backed Louis Napoleon for the presidency in 1848, had persuaded his colleagues to support his candidacy, calling him a moron who'd be easy to lead by the nose. It's here in French, and I'm not going to attempt that, but you get the idea. Louis Napoleon had already organized 2 failed coup attempts, so inept that they were described as beyond comedy. When Bonaparte won the election, though, he had other ideas about how manageable he was. In 1851, failing to change the laws that prevented him from staying in power, he organized his 3rd coup d'etat, which was successful. Napoleon III reigned as emperor until 1870, remaking France in the process. What starts as farce may end as tragedy, a lesson that pundits should already have learned from their sneering dismissal of Trump when he first announced his presidential candidacy. Yes, the Trump campaign's lawsuits are pinnacles of incompetence, too incoherent and embarrassing to go anywhere legally. The legislators who have been openly pressured by Trump don't seem willing to abide the crassness of his attempt. States are certifying their election results one by one, and the General Services Administration, the agency that oversees presidential transitions, has started the process of handing the government over to Biden. If things proceed in their ordinary course, the Electoral College will soon vote, and then Biden will take office. But ignoring a near catastrophe that was averted by the buffoonish, half-hearted efforts of its would-be perpetrator invites a real catastrophe brought on by someone more competent and ambitious. President Trump has already established a playbook for contesting elections in 2016, had already, by casting doubt on the election process before he won, and insisting that he only lost the popular vote due to fraud. Now he's establishing a playbook for stealing elections by mobilizing executive, judicial, and legislative power to support the attempt. And worse, much worse, the playbook is being implicitly endorsed by the silence of some leading Republicans and vocally endorsed by others, even as minority rule becomes increasingly entrenched in the American electoral system. It's not enough to count on our institutions to resist such onslaughts. Our institutions do not operate via magic. They do not gain their power from names, buildings, desks, or even rules. Institutions rely on people collectively agreeing to act in a certain way. Human laws do not simply exert their power like an inexorable pull of gravity. Once people decide that the rules are different, the rules are different. The rules for electoral legitimacy have been under sustained assault, and they're changing right before our eyes. I guess really I would throw in here, just think about the release of tax information for an illustration of that one. You can't do that. Well, what if he does? Then why everyone would, of course, he'd never win, and then we would... We're being tested, and we're failing, she continues. The next attempt to steal an election may involve a closer election and smarter lawsuits. Imagine the same playbook executed with better decorum, or say without the doctrine of latches to help us. I mean, it'll be there, but suppose you file in time this time. Or someone says, I don't accept this as an excuse. A president exerting pressure that is less crass and issuing tweets that are more polite. If most Republican officials are failing to police this ham-handed attempt at a power grab, how many would resist a smoother, less grossly embarrassing effort? Adding to the crisis is that many of the 74 million who voted for Trump now believe the election was outright stolen. They believe that they were robbed of the right to vote. How many of these supporters will be tempted to carry Trump's claims about being cheated out of an election victory to their logical conclusion? Meanwhile, millions of people around the country are repeatedly experiencing that being a majority is not enough to win elections. Even if one does win, not always enough then to be able to govern. Yes, we do have that problem looming as well. When Biden takes the presidential oath in January, Many will write articles scolding those who expressed concern about a coup as worrywarts or as people misusing terminology. Ooh, not that. But ignoring near misses is how people in societies get in real trouble the next time. And although the academic objections to the terminology aren't incorrect, the problem is about much more than getting the exact term right. Alarmism is problematic when it's sensationalist. Alarmism is essential when conditions make it appropriate. There's actually even a little bit more here. I don't think we're going to get to it all. As we hit to our break, we'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is with us. I have there's a bit more, I think, to the to Zeynep Tufekci's article in the Atlantic. I encourage you to read it all, but I think we got the major points of it on the record. And as Joan joined us during the break, I guess this is news to me. I haven't seen. Would this qualify as breaking news, or am I way behind on this? I don't know.
It's relatively breaking.
Okay. So we have discussed now that there are 3 states where Trump has tried to intervene directly with the state legislatures or the governors and urge them to do something by magic to reverse the results of the election in those states. And that hasn't worked. But so now a new legal tack, I don't know whether there's any grounds or whatsoever, but what happened here? Who else is intervening?
I can't imagine that it has any grounds, and I don't see how this can be a thing, but I'm not a lawyer. So Texas is suing Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and I believe Georgia.
So those 3 that haven't
Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan, 4 states.
Okay.
To invalidate their election results.
Texas is suing. So
Texas is suing those states.
Let me get that again. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and another one? Is there a 4th?
Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia,
okay.
Michigan. The same he's been fighting in.
Okay, I forgot Wisconsin this time.
Left out Arizona.
Yeah, what's the problem? I mean, they're close enough to do something about it. I guess it's a near neighbor. They might invade us. So Texas is suing
those states.
Those states. Texas
asking
who?
Them
like
to. It's
the Attorney General, I guess, right? Paxton.
Zoe Tillman's
Paxson?
tweeting about it.
Wow. Okay.
She says it argues that the Supreme Court should invalidate the millions of these votes because,
sure, why not?
In part, Biden did better in these states than Hillary Clinton did, and than Trump was supposed to. So it's just suspicious that Biden got so many more votes, and thus the election should be tossed.
Okay. Not really. I don't think I get it, but all right. I'm going to look for Zoe Tillman's tweets.
Let the legislatures pick the electors.
Yeah, but just no explanation as to why would Texas have any standing to do that? They may not, but
I don't know how they have standing. She says it presents the rare situation where Supreme Court can have original jurisdiction to take up the case.
Okay.
Because it's a dispute between states.
Yes.
Although
true.
Calling it a dispute is maybe
yeah.
I guess a dispute's a dispute in legal terms, but
let's see if I can find this thing. Okay, well, goodness. I mean, there is such a thing as the court's original jurisdiction and certain things. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to take the case. They have the option to take it, and you'll only need 4, I guess, to conclude this. But,
Yeah, can they get 4 to look at this and say, yeah, this is what we want to do right now?
Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, there'll be some people who are excited by that, and some people who might even be inclined to do it in another point in time, but are just, lazy individuals and just, I don't really want this hassle. I'm ready for Biden to be in. Like, I don't know. Does Thomas ordinarily vote for it, but does, like, his wife say, a Biden presidency would be a gold mine for our activists. We'll rake it in. Just let it go. I don't know. Maybe that's fine. That's the right outcome. I don't have to embarrass myself. Let Alito do it if he wants to do it. Or what's her name? The new kid. Wow. Well, that's it's a new one. So the state of Texas plaintiff versus the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, state of Georgia, state of Michigan, state of Wisconsin. I see it here. Yeah, Zoe Tillman's got the well, that's remarkable. Again, seems a little late in the game, but you had to wait for the steal to happen in order to sue over it, I suppose. Okay.
I don't know I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. I think it looks ridiculous, but
it certainly sounds dumb.
We have to flip Texas top to bottom. I mean, Texas has caused so many problems.
Yeah.
In the courts for so long.
You're right.
Paxton's got to go. This crazy lawyering from Texas has to end.
Yeah. I mean, my first thought was of that Texas has, repeatedly endangered the Affordable Care Act by suing over things. Texas is the most aggrieved state we've got, I guess. They're just sitting down there stewing in their own juices.
And they've got the Fifth Circuit that helps them.
Yeah. Well, they built that too. So, that's, I don't know. I guess now we watch and see on what basis the people charged with this decide to, either take it up or dismiss it. Don't put this light on me. And I guess flurry of phone calls from John Roberts to everybody. Please, no, we don't want this case. Just don't touch it. I'll write the thing. You just sign it. You don't want to go to work right now. It's the holidays.
Yeah.
Come on. You're busy. Ordinarily you're out shopping, but there's a pandemic and some of you are old. Some of you are 13 and new to the court. So, and don't care about COVID either. What perfect appointment there. So yeah, I guess his work is cut out for him with Barrett. No, I don't want to stay home. I'm not staying home. I'm going out shopping masklessly. But, he might get her on the Christmas thing, though. You want to war on Christmas by taking this case and having us all work? Oh, yeah, you got me there. Yeah, I can't do that.
I have a very, very hard time believing this moves forward.
Me too, but I'm glad you brought it to our attention. It's quite, another bizarre entry in the...
It's amusing.
Yeah.
And while we're on the topic,
sure.
If you are a lawyer, you can go sign an open letter to the various bar associations across the country, asking them to investigate and sanction Trump's elite task force team of lawyers.
Okay.
As of
where's that?
December 6th.
Yes.
I think it was. They had more than 1,500 lawyers who have signed on, and not just lawyers, law professors, judges, a former senator, former judges, former U.S. attorneys, lawyers in the Department of Justice.
Okay.
It's I think a good start for having some reckoning for how this administration has treated the rule of law. I mean, start right now and work your way backwards. Start with his lawyers trying to undermine the election and just work your way backwards through all of the crimes Trump and team have committed.
Where is this petition. This isn't a Daily Kos
I
action.
just posted it, and I
okay.
also sent you a link.
All right. Well, then I will take it. I don't have the right screen open. Ah, there we are. LawyersDefendingDemocracy.org. Okay.
If you're a lawyer,
Yeah.
if you've ever been admitted to the bar, and I guess you have to it would be best if you were still a member in good standing of the bar.
I mean, yeah, it's always a good idea if you can be one. None of the, I don't think any of the members of the Elite Strike Force are. Or maybe Sidney Powell may still yet be a member of the bar. That maybe not for long, but yeah, my understanding is I don't know what Giuliani's status is, but as you told us early on, he hadn't been in federal court in decades.
30 years, 40 years.
Jenna Ellis, I understand, hasn't paid her bar dues in some time, so she may not be a member of the bar.
I missed that.
This I got from the least trustworthy of all possible newspaper sources, the Daily Mail. So I'm constantly warned about them. But
we do know that she's attached in unspecified, creepy ways to the Amistad Project. What are the Thomas More Society?
Yeah. Okay.
She's on their board of directors, apparently. And they're nuts.
Remarkable.
They're a religious freedom nonprofit law firm.
She has done tremendous work stitching together a veneer of, I guess, respectability and accomplishment for somebody who really has neither.
In those
She's terrific
crazy
at this.
legal circles.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they respect her. I mean, nobody really respects these organizations, but she's built a thing of a resume that has things that if you checked on them, is she really on the board of this, whatever this stupid society is? Yeah, she's there. All right, well, a society. That sounds like something. But between that and I was reading the other day that she's ascended to senior legal advisor to the presidential campaign from traffic court, essentially, in Colorado. I mean, she's got zero experience in any sort of serious criminal or civil litigation whatsoever. She's
also been very careful not to actually file anything with any courts or argue before any courts.
Yes, which I think, by the way, is the best evidence for the Daily Mail possibly being right. She hasn't signed anything because she's not a member of the bar anywhere.
Either that or she's smart enough to know that that's a losing battle and she should probably think about protecting her reputation such as it is by not doing that. I
think, I'm looking at the harbor master's log here, and I believe that ship has sailed, actually. I don't think there's any protecting her reputation.
You're probably right. But I would very much like for the bar associations to strip them of their membership. I would also like all of the judges who've had to deal with them for all of these weeks to start sanctioning them.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to see them at least initiate, if for nothing else, than to show everybody how difficult it sometimes is to actually get to the sanctions stage because of various technicalities along the way. But we've been talking a lot about technicalities today. So, it doesn't hurt the judge any to say we should have the professional standards boards of the bars look into this. It's a legit complaint.
Well, the thing is, it is the rule of law.
Yeah.
And it is sort of the basis of everything in our republic, the right to vote. What they are attacking is elections law. What they are attacking is enfranchisement of every American citizen. When they're talking about wholesalely throwing out millions of ballots on the lie of voter fraud.
Yep.
It's drilling down. It is kind of important stuff. And protecting the right to vote, fighting voter suppression, sort of has to be where we start.
Yes. I mean, it makes good policy sense to do this, to drill down on it this way in particular. People really should be held to account. But yeah, every time we have this fight with Republicans, and everybody comes to realize, one party is for allowing people to vote and one party is against it. But occasionally they blurt it right out and say voting is a privilege, they insist, and not a right. Mm-hmm. And they say that very frequently, although it's interesting watching in some of their filings here, where they're claiming, equal protection and due process violations by one state or another. I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of the Texas lawsuit. That would hinge on insisting that there really is a right to vote, and that the court needs to take these things up on an expedited basis because there's a fundamental right at stake, which, it would be interesting for some of the other justices to say this fundamental right was last week a privilege to you in another filing.
Right.
I should just point that out. So I'm not that convinced that I do think it's a fundamental right. I'm just not convinced that you think so. And this is your argument. So
it's a fundamental right if you're going to vote Republican.
Yeah. Well, basically that's where they stand on this thing, and won't
although
go any
they're
further.
happy to throw out Republican votes too.
Sometimes
they are focusing on heavily Democratic cities, states with heavily Democratic cities, the black cities.
Yes,
let's be clear about it.
Okay,
it's their regular target for voter suppression. Black people, black and brown people.
Quite true, and and I guess they're willing to throw out some Republican votes if it helps them get to the major target, which is the black votes in these cities. I mean, a lot of the statewide votes sometimes will go Republican, but they just say it would be even more Republican if we could just cut this one city out, and then they actually try and do it.
Yep.
And
they're not even being sneaky about it before.
No.
In the Bush administration, they'd sort of tried to do it with other words. They tried to use other justifications to say it was about, preventing voter fraud and protecting elections. And now they're just flat out saying, no, we just pretty much don't want these people voting. So,
yeah,
there you go.
Well, yeah,
nothing subtle about it ever anymore.
Yeah. And, a large part of the beginning of the show today, and particularly reading about what Zeynep Tufekci had written here in The Atlantic, is a point that's been made by a lot of people. Similar point being, you've been saved from disaster by the incompetence of the Trump team, but what if a more competent team were in place? And you've just said, it's not a what if. We once had a more competent team, but it's hard to believe. Talk about the rehabilitation of the reputation of George W. Bush. He had a more competent team than Trump did. They were terrible, and I don't mean to rehabilitate them on policy grounds, but they were better at what they were trying to do than Trump. And they were able to embed people in the Justice Department to remain there in place for the incompetent team of Trump to come in and take advantage of, that they were still there. I mean, as evil and terrible and disgusting
they've been competent enough to do tremendous damage.
Yes. And some of them, for whatever reason, I think they were supposed to be embedded and they left. But I'm just thinking the old evil bastard Hans von Spakovsky, where he inside the mechanisms of the Justice Department still, or elsewhere where he could pull levers, what damage might have been done by leaving behind someone like that, who could salvage the clown-ish attempts of the Trump team. I don't know. Problematic. You're right. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Very scary. I mean, they've laid out a pretty good template for somebody competent to come do this, which makes it a good thing that Ted Cruz is so, that he's the Zodiac killer.
Yeah, right.
Because if he wasn't the Zodiac killer, and if people just didn't absolutely despise him, he'd be smart enough probably to pull something like this off.
I wonder. Yeah, I mean, he's certainly smarter than the Trump team, although there's something
Maybe.
about him that makes me
he
think.
did volunteer himself to go argue the Supreme Court case against Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court did the case against Pennsylvania, so maybe not.
Right.
That's his attempt to get the MAGA forces behind him for 2024, I think.
Yes. He's certainly willing to be clownish when he thinks it will, benefit him in another presidential race or something of that sort. And I guess he's willing to do that because apparently others who are more up to speed on Supreme Court procedure pointing out there's nothing to argue at this stage of the game with this. This is just a motion that will be taken up without oral arguments, if it's taken up at all at the Supreme Court. But there's no rallying the MAGA troops or fundraising from them by saying, I will make statements in support of someone else's memorandum. That's not exciting. I'll go argue it myself in front of the Supreme Court. I've been wondering whether we could get something started among the MAGA tweeters and troops. We should be demanding somehow. I got to find the right persona and fake Twitter account for this to start saying, you know what? To hell with all these fancy lawyers who keep losing all these cases. Trump should argue the case himself. He's the most skilled orator we've got. You don't think the court would allow the president of the United States to argue it's his own case? Of course they would, and just insist that he do it. I mean, I don't know if he'd believe it. Oh, I like to let the lawyers handle these things, but be interesting.
Oh, I'm sure he thinks he could do it better.
Sure,
it's Trump.
He thinks he's a better general than the generals. I'm sure he's said somewhere, I know the law better than my lawyers, but I let them handle it because I got better things to do.
I'm sure he says that.
Oh, yeah.
In his head.
I'm sure it's out there, too. He's probably let
now
it
I'm
spill. Now I'm
thinking about what's going on in Trump's head, and that's terrifying.
Yeah. Man. Well, what else is he destroying that? I'm trying to think. I think we've the floor is wide open. We've touched on every possible subject, so I don't know. But
well, what he's doing that's really horrifying is all of the rules that they're trying to put through.
Right, last minute.
Yeah, they don't have a list of them off the top of my head. ProPublica's been doing an ongoing
good. All right, well,
tally of what's happening with them, and there's some just horrifying stuff. Like one I wrote up last week or the week before for HHS, trying to force the department on an annual basis to evaluate every single rule and regulation in the entire sphere of health and human services and determine if it is having a disproportionate impact, if there's too many people that it's affecting. It would take dozens of staff all year to stay on top of evaluating those rules and determining which ones they needed to keep. It would just it's unreasonable. It's insane, and they're about ready to finalize it. And a lot of it's directed toward Obamacare specifically, of course, because it came with hundreds of regulations. I mean, pages and pages and pages of them. Yeah. So,
I mean, it's busy work that I can understand, like the need to review regulations, but you do that outside
which does happen, is built into the work of what the various agencies do
ordinarily. Okay,
but not on this scale and not every single year and every single regulation.
Yeah,
so.
That's just meant to be busy work that'll make it impossible either to use any of the regulations or do anything else.
And as obnoxious as it is, it's one of the least dangerous that they've tried to promulgate. It's
directly anyway. Yeah.
Again, there are enough competent people in the administration to really, really lay a lot of landmines for Biden, and that's precisely what they're doing. They're going to try to keep him so tied up in busy work and nonsense and undoing horrible stuff that he won't be able to have an impactful first 100 days.
That's
and also
their
they
hope.
think probably some of the stuff they can keep in and just screw with him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly hope not, and certainly if you can have confidence in anybody's ability to either do it themselves or build a team that's skilled at knowing where to look for these things so that they can be rooted out somewhat methodically. I mean, 40 plus years in government would probably do the trick. So,
right, and having been in the White House just 4 years ago,
right,
and having a lot of people who had 8 years experience in the administration of Obama and Biden being able to come back in, and they know where all the levers are. They know they can scour all of this.
Right.
So I've come around to the idea that maybe Biden, as unenthusiastic as I was about his candidacy,
sure,
might be the right person right now to try to rebuild the government. Because he knows how to do it. That's for sure.
Had been there. Well, maybe perhaps less learning curve, although, most of this stuff is handled at staff level.
Warren would have figured it out pretty damn quick.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that does make sense.
But they can always call her to help, so.
Okay. Yeah, this, a long road and difficult task ahead. I'm thinking about, there are so many other places that you mentioned, laying landmines, the recent, like mass firings at the Pentagon and apparently replacing people on, I don't know how powerful this board is, but putting Corey Lewandowski and David Bossie somehow now on this new, I don't understand exactly what his role is.
A board that advises the Defense Department on procurement, I think, or something. Yes. I'm not sure. But
that's what it sounded like.
I don't think they're particularly powerful.
Yeah, I was curious, why do it? And I don't think anybody has figured it out entirely yet.
Yeah.
Except
because he can, to own the libs.
Yeah, that, and I think it's an unpaid position, so there wasn't that, but I guess they can screw with things, and
I in large part I think it's just trolling.
Yeah,
government
you
to
may be
own
right.
libs is a lot of what we're seeing out of Republicans.
Possibly the case.
That and nihilism with Mitch McConnell. There are areas like the Board of Governors of the Postal Service, and this comes back to why we've got to win those 2 seats in Georgia, just how important they are, so that Biden can do things like get the majority of the Board of Governors of the Postal Service back under control.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's all Mitch McConnell cronies, although there are 4 vacancies. So Biden, by filling those vacancies, could seize it back, and they could fire Louis DeJoy, and they could save the Postal Service.
That would be important.
But Mitch McConnell's not going to let those appointments go through if he can stop them. So everything right now, including trillions of dollars in stimulus to really help people, depends on getting those 2 Senate seats in Georgia.
Yes. Everything really hinges on that, and more ways than you can imagine. I don't think anybody in our audience needs any additional motivation to know that, and they probably know that innately. But yeah, it's just that more stimulus. Of course, we've got the spending situation in general, counting down to the deadline.
Yeah, it was going to be
Friday.
This Friday. Now it's going to be next Friday.
Right. They'll push it. So all the time we've been talking about they're not having
trying to figure out how they're doing the stimulus, how they're going to do the relief bill. Yeah. So far, not well. But stay tuned. Hopefully.
Yeah. Right. So plenty to happen. It looks like we'll have a CR just to patch things up for a week, and then they'll try again the original plan that you had outlined that they were hoping to do just a big omnibus bill. Couldn't get it together. And so they're pushing it for a week. So we get both.
They're pushing it for a week. We have another week of this. So, happy holidays.
Right. They'll want to get out of there eventually. And for some reason our music stopped there. So that'll screw things up pretty good. Anyway, I appreciate your coming by and updating us on this and giving us the breaking news of what Texas is up to. I missed that.
A moment of levity for everyone.
And I hope it stays that way. Man, so so much happening. But thank you for bringing us up to speed on that, and just for taking the time out on a busy day. So you just posted this thing about the petitions, right? So I'll bring that to everyone's attention, and thanks for jumping off of that in time to come and speak to us today.
You are most welcome.
All right, let's see. So let's see. Next week it'll be the
next week
14th.
I am actually off.
Okay, I was going to say we're getting to that point in the year where don't be sorry about that. We all wish we had that day off. Good choice. We'll make do without your voice, but perhaps read up on what's been going on if you'll have been writing at that point or not. But at any rate, let us know when we'll see you next, and we'll check in with you then.
All right. Kagro.
Thank you. Take care. And we'll speak to everybody else here tomorrow. Be back tomorrow. And, I guess that's about it. We're a little bit late in getting back off the air. Don't worry about it too much, Justice. I think we'll be able to make do with the fact that we screwed up the audio on the way out. And I'll even tell people a thing or two about what comes up next.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
How about this here on a West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next with Justice Putnam. Trump loyalist Michael Pack plots a final purge of civil servants at the Voice of America before Biden takes office. Just another little spot, a little part of the spectrum where Trump's trolls are trying to do damage on their way out the door. Stay tuned for more.